Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another FP&A Trends webinar. And the subject of today's webinar is about how to harmonize your top-down and bottom-up planning processes. My name is Larissa Malnichuk. I'm Managing Director at FP&A Trends Group, an international FP&A board, and I'm happy to be here as a facilitator of this webinar. Today we have fantastic registrations, more than 550 from 37 countries around the globe, but more than 80% of the registrations came from North America. Welcome. Just a quick reminder about our today's agenda. At first, top-down and bottom-up planning processes, how it's done traditionally and what is the modern approach. Then we will look at the Microsoft Central Forecast case study, and then a presentation from technology thought leader about how technology can unify planning process. Of course, conclusions and recommendations, and at the end, we will have Q&A session. Now, quick introductions. Let me very quickly introduce our international panel. I would like to ask Charles and Dr. Liran to switch on your cameras. You're welcome. So let us start with very quick introduction. So I'm very happy to introduce to you Charles Peter, who is Finance Director responsible for global sales, marketing, and operations at Microsoft from their headquarters in Seattle. Charles is responsible for revenue planning, and he has more than 14 years of international experience at Microsoft, previously in his home country, France, at the moment in the US. A lot of experience at different finance roles across sales, FP&A, planning and product, and many others. At the moment, he is leading a revenue and forecasting insight team for global sales finance organization, and more than 500 individuals across the globe involved in this process. Charles is very passionate about financial analytical transformation and also harmonization of different planning processes. Charles, you're welcome. Welcome to FP&A Trends webinar.
Thank you. Happy to be there.
Thank you so much. Our second panelist today, Dr. Liran Edelist, who is President JEDEX, responsible for the whole North America. You know Dr. Liran from other meetings where he presented his insightful experience, shared insightful experience with us. Dr. Liran is PhD in business administration, and he is EPM expert with over 20 years of experience. At the moment, he is visiting professor at various academic and professional institutes, and previously he was a founder and CEO at top IT leading EPM practice company. He worked with C-level executives at global organizations such as Microsoft, Amazon, Pfizer, and many others. And Liran joined us also from North America, from Boston. Liran, you're welcome.
Thank you, Larissa. So happy to be here with you, Charles, and so many participants.
Thank you. And very quick introduction of my background. I'm former senior FP&A practitioner. Actually, the most of my career was working for big corporation managing FP&A teams in Europe and also globally. I'm qualified chartered management accountant here in the UK, also chartered global management accountant, a holder of FP&A certification. With my own business, FP&A Trends Group, for the last 5 years, I expanded the chapter of London FP&A board to 27 cities, 16 countries on 4 continents. And also, we are doing a lot of work on how artificial intelligence, machine learning can change FP&A. So we have our committee. So now I would like to ask our panelists to switch off your cameras just for some moments, some introductory slides from my side. FP&A Trends Group, those are the chapters where we traveled. Actually, we will restart some travel at the end of this year, but so far we are traveling digitally. And the latest developments from FP&A Trends Group, we started our best practice workshops and consultancy as well. About this webinar, 1 hour. There will be interactive Q&A session at the end, but you're welcome to start sending your questions straight away, very easy from this chat box that you can find on your panel. A presentation is available right now in the handouts, but don't worry if you didn't download it. It's all visible, but also you will receive both the recording and presentation after the meeting within 2 days. Please take part at the survey after the meeting when we finish this presentation, because we are so interested to hear from you. I would like to say thank you so much to our sponsor for today, JEDEX. Thank you so much for supporting us globally, the company that provides leading FP&A software, leading FP&A platform. Let me start with a few introductory slides, just to set up the tone for today's meeting. I like this opening quote from Jim Collins and Jerry Porras. So building a visionary company requires only 1% of vision and 99% alignment. And today we are going to talk about this alignment of our top-down and bottom-up planning processes. What is our typical FP&A process or planning process? Normally, it all starts from the targets, from our corporate. Somehow those targets are connected to strategy. Sometimes we know about the strategy, sometimes it's a secret. And then we start to generate a lot of submissions from operational level, from departments. And they meet somewhere in between. And very often they're done with silent approach, with lack of analytics, a lot of target negotiations, and a lot of political games. And as the result, we have something like this, something that we call planning gap, when our top-down and bottom-up meet in between. And we know, those of us in FP&A, we know that it's quite a big problem. Sometimes we put a placeholder there and we start to work on this, but normally it's a lot of processes of negotiations. But then let us look at the best class approach. Generally speaking, in our organization, we have 3 planning processes. It's our strategic planning process, it's our business planning or classical FP&A, and our operational planning process. And when we're talking about top-down and bottom-up, it includes all of those 3 planning processes. So top-down and bottom-up, we can integrate this, we can harmonize all of those 3 planning processes. We name this vertical integration, but also horizontal integration is so important. What are the ways how we can harmonize it? Traveling the world with FP&A board, we came with so many different ideas when we facilitated the discussions, so many different case studies around the globe. And of course, one of those popular methods, it's cascade of your key drivers from top to bottom. Understanding of your driver-based model, it's important to have driver-based model. And of course, it's about unified collaborative planning platform as well. But of course, there are many challenges such as data quality, organizational culture, multiple outdated systems and Excel, and so on and so forth. Before we start the first presentation with Microsoft case study, I really would like to ask you to vote and let us launch the first polling question. And the first polling question, it's about, I would like to understand how harmonized is your planning process. I'm launching the poll, and when you see this poll, if you can start voting straight away. So how would you describe your current planning process from the point of view of harmonization? What is the harmonization level of your planning process? It's not harmonized at all, or integrated between finance and operational level. It's integrated between finance and strategy, or it's fully harmonized between these 3 planning processes, both top-down and bottom-up. So please continue to vote. I can see that many of you already voted, so just a few seconds. If you can continue to vote, more than 70% of you voted. I'm closing the poll and I'm sharing the results with everyone. Very interesting results, and I can see straight away that 9% of you fully harmonized Absolutely fantastic. So harmonize between all three planning processes. 51% of you have harmonization level between finance and operations, 23% only between finance and strategy, but 18% of you not harmonized at all. I would like to ask both Charles and Liron to comment on this. And Charles, you are the first. Anything you would like to comment on?
Yes, sure, absolutely. Great results. Very interesting to see. Yeah, I think it's a good representation of where we at, and as the industry overall, like companies are thriving to harmonize their processes. I'll talk a little bit more about forecast and planning, but I think this is a good representation. It's critical to align, the strategy and how we actually operationalize. So I'm pleased with the 51%, but I'm also not very surprised that we only have 9% that are fully harmonized. So that's great to see, and good that we're discussing this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Dr. Liron, any commentaries from you, please?
Yes, absolutely. So as Charles mentioned, we're not really surprised to see that only 9% are fully harmonized. And by nature, it means that around 90% of you, the participants, are not really having that level of alignment between strategy, finance, and the operational level. What I do find interesting is actually the 20% or 18% that not harmonizing at all means that the financial process is more or less stays within that finance silo, and it's not expanding neither to the level below the operational level, and may not be even fully tied with the strategic level. By nature, this is an area to start, and probably start harmonizing with either strategic level and then going into the operational one. So we'll speak a little bit about that, and by nature later on how also technology can help you doing it easier within your organization.
Thank you so much for your commentary. From my side, I would say that I'm really pleasantly surprised that 9% of the companies that join us already fully harmonize. It's a great change comparing to the previous years when we checked those survey questions. Thank you for your commentaries. Thank you for your votes, everyone. I'm hiding the results. And now I would like to invite Charles Peter, Finance Director, Microsoft, to switch on the camera and to share with us insights, the case study from Microsoft from the point of view of top-down and bottom-up. Charles, you are welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Larissa. Very happy to be there, as I said again. So let's just get started. Let's go right in. I want to go into first a little bit of a background on how we look at things at Microsoft. Obviously, when it comes to harmonizing top down and bottom up, it's also about understanding what is the strategy, how do we look at the business, how do we report externally, and how do you align the shareholder expectation with how you're essentially operationalizing on those expectations. So this slide I'll go quickly, is just meant to give you a glimpse of how we think about our product, how they're structured. We really think about solution areas, and what is the field focus. And by field, I really mean sellers, the local teams that are really on a day-to-day with the customers. It's just to ground you again on some of the KPIs or key themes that we are looking at. We'll go to the next slide because I do want to spend more time there. First, here again, I'm just going to give you an overview of the different teams so you understand how at Microsoft we're a little bit organized and where do I sit, and how it gives you more context into the next few slides I will go through. But on this slide, what I want to point your attention is the bottom of the slide. On the left-hand side, you can see there's the field commercial sales finance team. These are all your teams across the globe, France, UK, Germany, you name it, right? All of your local finance team at the country level. And they will work with the local business partners around forecasting, planning, day-to-day revenue insights, close business recommendation. And they will also feed those insights, feeds a lot of their forecast numbers, planning with the HQ team. And that's where I sit, this HQ commercial sales finance team that I lead at core, based in Redmond. we're looking at the sales forecast. So we consolidate the sales forecast. We also do our own sales forecast perspective, and then we have to feed this to the central finance team. Central finance team is the team that works closely with our CFO, set expectation and guidance to the street, and they will work also with the engineering group finance, which are more product worldwide product finance team sitting here in Redmond as well, and they would work as a triad essentially throughout different processes. So whether you think about close, earning release, forecast, or planning, we all work all together. So you get a sense of top down and bottom up here from also team structure. I'll go into the next slide to go into more of the process. Thank you. So on this slide, what I want to really point your attention to is it's really important to optimize, forecast, planning, and really think about how do you do this, but without disrupting the sales and the execution. One thing we've been doing at Microsoft and going a little bit back and forth is how do you simplify forecast? How do you simplify planning for both the field team at the country level, but also at Corp? So we are more efficient in landing the strategy. And that's really kind of the key thing is you want to start from what is the vision, the strategy at the worldwide level, and what does it mean for the local teams? And I sit in the team in the middle that has to have this dual language of corporate, language, but also field execution language. On this slide, first I want to go through the accountability on the previous state and where we're going into the future, and highlight maybe a change we did this year that some of you will find interesting. But when we think about forecast and planning, we've typically had, our local teams submitting their forecast. We would consolidate at the corp level. We found ourselves by doing that the field did not necessarily have all of the information in their hands. They have the information locally about the deals, but do they have all of the information about, are we doing a change in price? Are we doing a change in strategy? Is there more of a macro element they need to consider? And also from an accuracy perspective, we saw an opportunity to make improvement. So that's why we set ourselves to also build a guidance at a worldwide level. So that would be something that my team will own and drive with the field teams to help them think about the next quarter, right? This is really about the forecast in that scenario. And when we were doing this for budget with the target cascade, for forecast, it was really new. And I think a great addition to help our field teams also understand, okay, for some products which are more strategic than others, what is the thinking? How do I need to think about the P times Q, the drivers? Is there something changing that I need to take in consideration? So that was a new thing that really helped, and we gained accuracy point by doing so. The level of details in the middle of the slide is interesting. So while this is probably a different language, I want to focus to you around the lines, the number of lines. These are essentially the combination, the permutations of how we do the forecast or the planning between HQ and field. In the past, we've really simplified on the field. We have about 300 lines. That means that they need to provide when they were doing a forecast, right? And we would consolidate this for all of the sub-region across the world, or the areas, I should say, and look at their assumption, their P times Q. Now, we found that it was not necessarily all of the details we were hoping for. In some cases, like we felt short of those insights by simplifying too much. And this is an interesting point where simplification or aligning top down and bottom up, sometimes you also need a little bit of those details to have the same language. It's really important to have a common language between Corp and the local subsidiaries, the local field teams. That's why, as we look into the future, we kind of went back and increased a little bit the details for our local finance teams. But I should say that where some of you may find this counterintuitive, we actually, through the right tooling, enable that. And I'll get into that after in a little bit. But the tooling enable us, like some of these rows, to be more automated, already seeded with some assumptions, hence the forecast guidance I mentioned earlier, to really help our field team think about, you can give more details with less work, and we've also with more insight and direction from the corp groups. The last thing I would say is from an approach perspective around really about the toolings. We went typically on the forecast, which was an offline Excel-based tools across our teams with pipeline information. We really moved to online and driver-based models. So looking at building the right platform, the machine learning, still using pipeline, of course, for our sellers, for our sales finance team as well to leverage. And yeah, same thing on the planning side, you know, how we evolve our tooling and our structure over the last few years to a more online platform. This platform is important because I really want to point your attention on the online driver-based models, like having those driver-based being similar or in the same definitions and alignment methodology between forecast and planning is key to align the two process and to align with corp and local subsidiary. The last point on this slide is about the market share. Really putting the emphasis on the market share gain from a planning perspective was kind of the starting point of setting target, right? It's the key thing to also set the direction, set what will then become your budget and quota for your sellers. And at the corp level, where we start from the market share, that's a discussion, you know, at the strategy level. How do you operationalize that and essentially cascade it down? We're able to cascade it down at Microsoft through those drivers, through those trends, etc. And that's the work that's happening that then aligns to how we do forecast. I'll go into the next slide to go through my kind of tool, what we're dealing with at Microsoft. So I touched on the methodology alignment. You heard me talk about, you know, how we go from market share gain to like common definitions, level of details, but that cannot happen without a good tool. And one of the tools we're using on the sales side that our sales finance team are using is called Commercial Product. It's a platform that we use with different methods embedded into the platform. So we have like pipeline methods. So my team will look into, okay, what does the pipeline say? What are the next large deals that are coming, we're working on for the next quarter? What is that telling me? Now, it's a sales tool. So as finance, we always have to be objective and look at it with a grain of salt. So what we do is apply different methodology. We would look at deal-based forecast, for example, which starts from the pipeline, but also apply a different calculation on top of it, assumption on top of it. We, of course, look at machine learning, time series, statistic, but also TN methods and P times Q with historical run rates, growth, or driver-based. I want to point your attention to the right-hand side of the slide. So you'll see those colored bars here. And what's interesting with those kind of point of views is I want to show you, like, when we go through a forecast round, we essentially triangulate by putting all of the information together. And this view really helped my team, help, you know, my CFO make a decision on how we think about the forecast for next year. That would give her like the perspective from our field teams that I talked about. So for example, the area CFO forecast, what's our budget? What are the engineering group I talked about earlier? What's their point of view? What's the field outlook, which is our latest update? Then we have in the green bar, like some of those methodology coming through the tools that I've described to you. And then we'll make our opinion. It's really important that when we harmonize our processes between top down and bottom up, that this tool that I'm talking to you about is enabled, at least in the sales side, which is my HQ team, but also the local sales team. The tooling and all those permutation or methods are enabled at corp and local, so that then I can go in and talk with, for example, the UK finance team and say, okay, what was your assumption? What was your P times Q assumption? Did you look at the guidance? How do you think about this? You know, and that enables alignment on a whole level of conversation, really, which is really powerful. And I'll go into my final slides about learnings before I open up for commentaries. We can go to the next.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you for sharing this interesting experience with us. Fantastic case study from Microsoft. I would like to ask Liran join us as well for very quick discussion after this presentation. Dr. Liran, what would be your key points after this presentation?
Well, first, Charles, great presentation. Thank you. And I think, you know, while I'm looking at that, and we all know Microsoft is a leader in digital transformation, It's awesome actually to see, even just look at this slide and to see, you know, the whole process of digital transformation at Microsoft. And you mentioned, you know, going from the Excel spreadsheet that are also a Microsoft product, right? But into the more modernized way. And those key decisions, like, you know, what do you do with P times Q? Where do you use the machine learning? How do you harmonize between the different processes? And those are kind of live decisions. It's interesting to see that it happens at the huge and maybe pretty often in enterprise in the size of Microsoft, but even small mid-sized organizations are having the same dilemmas and the same stuff. And by nature, you know, in my presentation, I will try to cover more about the tooling and how you take that and can put everything together in a nice way.
Thank you so much, Liran. From my side, Charles, I mentioned that at FP&A Trends group webinars, also at face-to-face meetings, we already looked at a number of case studies coming from Microsoft in Europe, in Asia. And if it's possible for one of the biggest companies in the world, especially with your machine learning forecast, to forecast it practically with the push of the button at different levels of your organization, it's a huge message to all of us in FP&A. And I think something what you demonstrated here, it's a great demonstration of so-called extended planning and analysis, when FP&A is going outside of just finance function to different levels of organization. So thank you so much for sharing this. Charles, do you have any commentaries from your side? And we go to the polling question, to the next one.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm ready to go to the polling question. Thank you, Larissa.
What we would like to do now, we would like to hear from our participants what is happening in your world right now. So I'm launching the second polling question. And as soon as you see it, if you can start voting, please. So it's about your current process. How would you describe your current tooling and model? I'm launching the poll. You can see it now. Please, can you choose one of those, only one of those? What is the best description for you? How would you describe your planning tool and model? It's non-existent. It's Excel and you don't have driver-based model. It's Excel, but you have a driver-based model. You have a dedicated planning system, but no driver-based model. You have a dedicated planning system, a driver-based model. So if you can continue to vote, I can see that more than 65% of you voted, just a few seconds. And we will close the poll and I will share the results with everyone. So it's about your tooling, it's about your tools and model. I'm sharing the results. And the good news that each one of you have something, at least Excel, maybe not a driver-based model. I can see that 18% of you have a dedicated planning system with a driver-based model, which is obviously great practice. 19% of you have a dedicated planning system, but not so dynamic, no driver-based model. Excel, but driver-based model, 45% of you. 18% Excel and no driver-based model. I would like to ask you, Charles, to comment on this.
Yes, thank you, Larissa. I mean, what results? I mean, it's very interesting. And to be very transparent, at Microsoft, we were also, you know, in the 63% not so long ago. So when I see at the Excel, you know, driver-based model, not a driver-based model. Well, first of all, let's remind us, like, Excel is probably one of the best tools for any proof of concept type of modeling, right? It gives the flexibility to the user to adjust and when, you know, change, make a lot of flexibility, especially when you take assumptions, forecast, or planning in front of a business partner, for example. When we think about new product as well, you're launching, you're changing your business modeling, you're changing your product from, you know, a SaaS or IaaS PaaS subscription to consumption type. I mean, Excel is the tool to enable a fast change, and any user can go in. The dedicated planning system is, by definition, needs a little bit more planning, and it's not always as agile, but we're making progress with the solution in the industries for more agile systems. Now, I would say a dedicated planning system brings a ton of value as you're trying to harmonize your top-down processes and bottom-up, because everything also from a data flow gets stored and exchanged. Many teams can tap into. It comes with a lot of values. So I'm not really surprised by the polling results here. I should say a bit surprised there's still a lot of people using Excel, not having a dedicated planning system, but in a good way. And also, I think there's an opportunity there. But that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much, Charles, for your extended answer on this, for sharing your experience. Dr. Liran, your quick commentary on this, please. So what would you add?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, Larissa, now when we see that everyone has a type of a system, whether it's a spreadsheet or a planning system, maybe next time we will add another option and ask how much people are using also AI as part of that. So actually, I see those results, and I think it's an excellent opening to my presentation in a few moments, because we do see the 2/3 are still using spreadsheet, and maybe the challenge is how you can actually move from spreadsheets into that harmonization between top-down, bottom-up, and using advanced tool, not just the classic methodology, but even adding the AI into that. So very excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Liran. Thank you everyone who voted. This is the time for us to look at the subject of how technology can unify the planning process. Dr. Liran Adelist, President at JEDEX. Liran, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And again, excited to be here from Boston. You can see this is a real view from our offices here, finally back in office. Let's go to the next slide and speak a little bit about our agenda for this conversation. What I like to start with is with our typical challenges, and what do we see sometimes at customers that are common mistakes when you run either top-down or bottom-up, or incorrectly try to harmonize between them. So I will speak a little bit about those challenges, and then we'll go into the top-down approaches, how we can harmonize the top-down and the bottom-up. As I promised a few moments ago, we will speak about what the AI can add into that, and we also heard that from Charles as part of their planning process. And as always, I'll conclude this session with some key takeaways that I hope you can take and use in your organizations. So my first slide next is about the typical challenges and the common mistake that we see. So the first one, it's kind of, I like to tell it as a story. I was at one of the FP&A event, and a guy came to me and asked me, hey, we have some problem because everyone is submitting the budget, and then the management is rejecting the budget, and we're starting that cycle over and over again. So I would say the most common mistake is to start your budget planning as a bottom-up exercise and not with a top-down. That means that users are putting whatever they want in their planning form, spreadsheets, planning system, but then it's misaligned with the expectations of headquarters. The next topic here is that we say, okay, so some organizations understand they need to start with a top-down approach, but what they do, they just give general guidance. They say, okay, in North America region, we want to grow in 10%, but what does it mean 10%? So sometimes there are like hidden expectations that each and every budget owner knows what FP&A people are doing, and then general guidance are not enough, and people are expecting to get a little bit more strategic guidance, like if you want to grow in 10%, what does it mean? A price increase, focus on product segments, and so on. And that leads into the third point here, that sometimes we get into a dollar-based top-down. So we say, okay, we start a project, the process with a top-down, but that's only a dollar-based. So it still means that, okay, we have the budget, we give the guidance to the operational and the budget owners, but then, how are they going to get into those numbers? And last but not least, and I think we've seen that at the previous presentation, and I'm sure that the 2/3 answer that they're still using Excel, I believe they feel the pain, right? If you're not using a modern platform, it's very difficult to have like different versions to compare between them, to understand what is the gaps or where are the gaps between the top-down guidance and the bottom-up. So those are the typical challenges that we see. And by nature, if you're talking about challenges, I also want in my next slide to speak about how are we going to resolve that, and later on show some examples. So by nature, as I already mentioned, if you start your budgeting with a bottom-up, my initial recommendation would be always start with a top-down. Top-down represent what the strategic level of the organization think. You want to harmonize strategy and operational, and by nature finance in between. So start your process as a top-down. Our recommendation is not giving like blank spreadsheet. I know a lot of organizations like the zero-based budgeting, you can still do that, but you usually want to do like a pre-populated planning for your budget owners, and you always have a baseline to help them starting with, and not just start with a blank forms. And then the next topic, at least for the critical areas, either in your expense, invest, or revenue planning, do it as a driver-based. And Charles mentioned that, you know, P times Q type of models, very important. The reason it's important, it helps you really to find the gaps once actual are coming in. So if you know that you're missing whatever $10 million, you will know if that's like, you know, a variance in recurring, if that's a variance in your price, in your quantity, and so on. And last but not least, I'm coming here also as a technology representative. By nature, using a modern EPM solution will allow you better level accuracy and will save a lot of time in your process, gives you much more time to analyze the data and know where to improve. So that's probably needless to say. Next, I would like to go through a couple of examples how a top-down and bottom-up are harmonized. The very base case is, again, the case that we are less admire, but it's definitely better than just having a bottom-up process. That would be a simple use case when you do a dollar-based top-down approach. So most of our organization, what usually they do, they have a baseline version, and most common would be the latest forecast, what, you know, forecast 9+3 as the baseline. And then they say, okay, that would be our base assumption. We will create that as the next year type of a version, make some adjustments, make a couple of assumptions on top of that, and then literally, okay, cascading that maybe in the lower level to the field, and then the field can do like a bottom up. And by nature, those two-thirds that are still using Excel, I believe you're doing similar process like that. And then, as I mentioned, probably the main challenge over there is how you can literally spread the spreadsheet, collect the data back, compare the different versions, making sure you always have the last update. So that would be the first challenge. And by nature, the second big challenge here is once you deal only with dollars, as I mentioned, it's very difficult to trace driver. It's very difficult to give the guidance where you expect to see the growth, where do you expect to see some saving, and so on. So our next slide, it has even like a nice demonstration. You can follow that while I'm explaining. The next piece is, okay, we want to go through a top-down and bottom-up harmonized process, but also add the driver-based budgeting here. What you can see, if you can see that animation running, what you can see is a very interesting case where we start a baseline. That baseline is a dollar-based value, but we're using here an EPM solution that literally convert that top-down exercise into price and quantity, so we can do really a driver-based planning. And that type of allocation, the advantage of a system that can be held completely automatic based on, you know, price and quantity assumptions that you give to the system. So no huge spreadsheets and so on. What you can see next is once we did that, we freeze the version, and now we can say, okay, this is our top-down guidance, and that top-down guidance is getting into a bottom-up exercise. And I think we jumped into the third slide. So once we spoke about top-down and bottom-up with a driver-based budgeting, this next example is adding into that the AI aspect. So quickly, what you see at this screen here is that we have actual data. So that's, most companies have. And by the way, without good actual data, it's very difficult to run through an AI exercise. And the idea is that we can use different machine learning and AI capabilities to create a prediction. And this is the set of data that was just populated right now. Very interesting with AI, what we can always do is we can create a prediction, but we can also create like a lower and upper bound or boundaries to the planning. So, and Charles mentioned that yeah, we have the AI, it's an awesome tool, but we still want the human to influence and to check the AI result, because the human has a lot of knowledge that the machine doesn't always have. In that sense, what we are seeing here is, again, top-down and bottom-up exercise. The AI is giving us a base prediction. That base prediction is getting cascaded, using some business logic to a lowest level of planning. And within that lowest level of planning, the users that are getting the information, again, combination of driver-based and AI, they can still make adjustments to that. So the idea is that they can say, hey, we agree, it's a good prediction, or we're actually going to do some tweaks to those plans, and we're going to change, maybe switching revenue from one region to the other, or from one month to the other. Then the system can actually show, with the adjustment, are you above or below those boundaries? We can create alerts around that, and so on. So the idea is that, what we try to show here is that this is really like, the cream. You use a tool to simplify and harmonize the top-down and bottom-up to make sure you're creating that alignment, right, between the strategic and the operational level. Then you enrich that with a driver-based modeling, and by nature, the next piece is to add AI and more advanced tools like alert and so on to make it more efficient. To summarize everything, we have the next slide that try to give you some key takeaways. Again, hopefully will help you with your journey to digital transformation. So if we try to look at that as a process, right, we start with the executive guidelines, what our leadership is telling us that they're expecting to do within the next financial planning period. And I like to speak about financial planning period because we're not always planning for years. Sometimes it's for months, for quarters, for weeks, whatever. Then, based on that, as FP&A professional, we need to make sure we identify the drivers. So if we are growing in specific area, if we want to do a cost saving, we need to understand what are the business drivers that can drive that decision, and we need to have the alignment around them. And the AI enrichment can help us with those drivers, right? It can say, hey, does it make sense or no, and how those business drivers are growing, like, quantities, prices, demand, market share, and so on. And once we have that, we have a good top-down version to start, and then we can do the cascade or the allocation process. As I mentioned, I like that the bottom-up is pretty much pre-populated for your budget owners. So when they get a spreadsheet or they get the planning sheet from their planning solution, they can see the data and they can make an adjustment there, or they can say, well, headquarter FP&A team did an awesome job. We accept that it's a good budget. We're ready to go. So bottom-up adjustment coming next. Then we go into a final version, sometimes back and forth, and we concluding everything with, the actual data that we're starting, and then a forecast process. So those are the stages. For me, that's the best practice that I would advise any organization to consider. By nature, you need to make sure that your technology is supporting that. Charles mentioned about, how can we make sure that the technology is agile enough and we can use as many out of the box tools of that, adding the AI, the driver-based, and again, making sure that we are harmonizing between business goals, operational levels, simplifying that, creating more insight, and an easier and fun project for everyone. So that was my last slide. And I think back to you, Larissa and Charles, for some commentary next.
Dr. Liran, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your experience with us. To me, it's really powerful to remind people that it's not only technology, but the process. And your presentation very nicely demonstrated this. Charles, I would like to ask for your commentaries.
Yes, thank you. A lot to unpack in this great presentation from Liran. you know, I really like your animation, Liran. Make me think like we're not probably that far off from vocal command in planning tool. You know, how cool would that be, right? When you talk to your planning tool and you just say, hey, set the market share in this geo, and then it trickle down to all the data. I think that can be the path in the future. Very cool. Yeah, I think there's some key things in you know, planning models is I would like to emphasize on the data, the one source of truth from the data, and that's the value of planning system like this is when you're dealing with a lot of people working on planning or forecasting is what are the set of data that, you know, centrally you can pull into such a system and really have everybody align on. There are like, for example, recurring revenue, bank revenue, like if you're in a renewal subscription model, like, you know, these things already, they're in your system. So how can you bring those and align everybody there on that? And then the next step becomes on aligning on, you know, the drivers, the methods. The last point I would love to say is on the AI. I love how Liran said, you know, you still need a human to look into this. That's very true. I mean, we learned through this year as we went through, you know, the COVID pandemic, like some of this we could not predict. Like any AI would not have been able to predict this. So you have to have some form of human intelligence that goes into the assumptions. And so you know, or you're launching a product or you're doing something, right? You need the human to be able to take those assumptions, explain those assumptions, look into this. I think the AI is good for well established businesses that have a lot of data points historically and very predictable. But yeah, very good presentation from your end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. From my side, I would like to add that definitely it's about the process and it's about the power of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And Liran, it's wonderful to see the latest trend that technology providers started to enhance their solutions with artificial intelligence, machine learning in particular. So thank you for sharing all of this. Any commentaries from you, Liran, before we go to key takeaways and then Q&A session?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, completely agree with two comments. From my side, it's not just experience, it's also excitement, you know, over the years, you know, to see how technology is making us to do better, and completely agree with the comment of Charles, right? You know, you do the budget, you start with what you know, and then what you predict and what you want to happen, right? So you take those different areas and you use the different tool to make sure that you get the most accurate forecast and, you know, the most capabilities to explain the variance later on. So
thank you so much, Dr. Liran. Now key takeaways, and before I ask I asked Charles and Dr. Liran to give their key takeaways. Some key takeaways from my side. Actually, this is the slide from Mike Hartwait, Corporate Finance Director at Walmart. And I think it's a great slide that consolidates everything what we discussed today. So top down and bottom up. The processes that integrate the vision with specific, the strategy with execution. And obviously, we are talking about harmonization of strategic, financial, and tactical or operational planning processes. And it's all about continuous screening, setting the target from the top. It's about cascaded drivers and forecasting process that is reassessment of what's happening. And of course, it's about managing of your operational pipeline and accountability. And this is never-ending process. This is the process that is going in circles, and top down and bottom up, it's about this. So I would like to ask both Charles and Liran to switch on the cameras and to give your 30 seconds key takeaways before we go to the Q&A session. And just a quick reminder to everyone, please continue to send your questions, even if you don't have enough time to answer all of them. We will do this after the meeting through email. So please, your key takeaways, Charles.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good slide that summarized the discussion from the vision at the top to, you know, bringing the accountability down. You know, we do this from essentially market share down to sellers quota, right? And how do you go from, you know, that top vision to really the bottom of accountability and operationalize it is that's the role of finance. That's the role of the FP&A team to drive this process. I would like also to not dismiss like the effort it takes in over communicating, in having the right calendar, the right process, the right back and forth and iteration to be as harmonized as possible across the team. It's many teams that are working across forecast and planning. Yes, we need the best tools. Tools are also defining the work-life balance of all the people out there that are effectively doing the work. But it's key that communication and process is also set accordingly. So yeah, that would be my
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for your key takeaways. Dr. Liran, your quick key takeaways before we go to Q&A session, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a combination here of, a picture sometimes worth 1,000 words. So it's a good summary of the whole methodology and the different capabilities. I think there is one piece that might be a bit missing here. We see a big picture. It could look very complicated, but I think as FP&A professional, we also have to make sure that we are simplifying everything, right? So if we're talking about technology needs to simplify the process to include all those different capabilities: target, forecast, budget, accountability. So it is not just about making sure that you align with everything, but also simplifying, because otherwise, going back to the way you started that, otherwise it's very difficult to implement the vision and the strategy. So also simplification is a key piece here.
Thank you so much. Great key takeaways. And now we are starting the Q&A session. We already have a lot of questions, but please continue to send those. We will be able to answer all of them after the meeting if we don't have time to answer during this session. Charles, the first very interesting question is to you. First of all, I think some people were confused. They thought that you have your own Microsoft forecasting process, yeah? Because you actually, as a finance director, you described a very interesting process, your architecture for FP&A that you're using at the moment. So the question is, what tooling do you use at the moment, and what you do in Microsoft if you top down and bottom up don't align with each other? If it's happened, you see, does it happen? And if it's happened, what do you do? So 2 questions. The first one about your tooling, just very quickly, and another one, what you do if they are not meeting in the middle. Yeah.
Yes. No, very, very good question. So, on the tooling, it's a combination of various tools. We have in-house developed solutions. We use Dynamics 365 or on product. I mean, as the software tools that we develop, we're able to leverage those, of course, to build, for example, everything pipeline. So we build upon on top of this. We have Azure machine learning. We can use, of course, Excel. So it's a combination of in-house, product for the most part that we're leveraging across our processes. Yeah, and I would say, to the second question, which is how do you resolve those iteration where sometimes there's a misalignment? I mean, that happens all the time. Okay, so and it's actually a lot of falling on my team to do that connection between the local field finance team and the strategy at Corp. How do we make that bridge? And so in my team, I can tell you that, I have worldwide controllers that are experts on their specific products. So one person on Azure, one person on Modern Work, etc., who would do that bridge and essentially talk to the local finance team, talk to the Corp group, say, okay, there is probably something we need to align on. What is the driver that is missing? How do we resolve this? And it takes, I think the previous slide also was pointing to that, it takes time to just sit down, iterate, adjust, tweak. That's where I reference that maybe Excel is very agile, but some are also more modern planning solutions can also enable to do that. How do we tweak methodology? And sometimes it's not necessarily a misalignment between 2 persons. It can also be by a change in the strategy. Last minute change may happen. A new product will completely changing the direction. That can really well happen. And so we have to sit down and communicate. I mean, it's key that, the communication and the alignment on the methodology is crystal clear. Because if it's not crystal clear for within finance who are dealing with a lot of those processes, then imagine for business partners, like they will be completely thrown off. And we need that simplicity that Liran also talked about. So yeah, I hope this helps with the question.
Thank you so much for your answer, Charles. Dr. Liran, the next question is to you. A very interesting question indeed. In the mass production with over 100 product types, there have been no alignment between the production constraints and sales forecasts. I unfortunately see that all top-down models are built based on wrong inputs. What would be a system solution or products to offer to those companies? Dr. Liran, what would be your answer? Liran, you're on mute, I think.
Yes, sorry. It has to happen once, every presentation that someone will be muted. So it was me this time. Anyhow, I think it's an interesting conversation, especially for an organization that are dealing with production when you have your financial forecast or FP&A forecast sometimes disconnected from the production line. This is usually a problem that we are solving with a better alignment between S&OP, the sales and the operational level. When we're speaking, and we spoke here a couple of times ago about the extended concept of FP&A and XP&A, we are saying that you have to make sure that the planning processes are making that alignment between the various areas. And one of those is really that the S&OP, making sure that you have a good demand planning, right? A good sales planning, and then you can go into the right production line and match between them. Is it going to be perfect? Over time, it should be much better. However, if you keep it as different silos and you're not creating the connection between the demand, between the potential supply that you have, even between the strategy, what out of those 100 products, what do you want to sell more, right? So if you're not making that alignment between the strategic goals and between the sales capacity and the production, it won't happen. So the idea is definitely expand your vision about what the planning process is and include those demand, supply, and production line all together. And by nature, it's possible, and there are many organizations that are already doing it.
Liran, thank you so much for your excellent answer. And the last question to both of you, Charles and Liran, but very quick answer, please. So what would be your top 2 steps to undertake for the harmonization of top-down and bottom-up planning processes? Charles, your 20-30 seconds, please.
Okay. I think defining the strategy is key, the vision. What are you trying to achieve? What is the goal of the company? Like set that, at the corp level and understand really what does it mean in terms of translation to local field teams. And how are you going to translate this strategy through your data, through your driver base to then turn into action and accountability? So for me, it's all about that vision at first. What is the goal? What is the goal of the CEO, of the CFO? How do I achieve this? And the second piece would be, how do I help my teams? Especially in the time of COVID, where it's been tough for everybody. How do I help them with their work-life balance? How do I help them go through those heavy processes with less efforts than the year before, I guess, but how do I help them?
Thank you so much, Charles. Dr. Liran, the same question to you. Your 20-30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I will try to continue that. So I would say the next piece in that chain that Charles started would be, as I mentioned before, is simplification, right? So making sure that the level of details, the way we're going to implement that is not overwhelming and it's simplified enough, but extensive enough to get insight and understanding. And maybe the next one is that it is always like a learning and improving process, right? It's not the one process that will fit forever. And we need to make sure that we're making those changes from start to end, every time we're learning the gaps, we're improving them, and we get better over time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liran. Thank you, Charles. I'm closing the Q&A session, but we have more questions. They will be distributed between 2 of you after this session. And to our participants, you can continue to send them. Just a few closing slides. Please stay with us because after we close, there will be some survey questions. We would like to hear from you how we can do better, what we can change, and so on so far. It was our last digital event before the summer break, but we already restarted in the middle of September, and there will be some interesting events. So please join us. The registration process already started. And finally, I would like to say thank you so much to our sponsor, JEDEX. Thank you so much for supporting us today and globally as well. I would like to say thank you so much to all our participants. Please stay connected. Those are the ways how we can stay connected. Please share with us your insights, your case study, your thought leadership, your innovations. You know how to find us. And finally, Dr. Liran, Charles, your fantastic team. It was such a pleasure collaborating with you. And I'm really looking forward when I will be both in Boston and also in Seattle to meet with you in person. So hopefully it will happen at the beginning of next year. Please stay safe and thank you so much. All the best. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Larissa.
Thank you.
Thank you all.